Sid Meier inhabits a rarefied strata of video game developers and is one of the greatest names in the medium. Starting at Microprose in 1982, he established the turn-based strategy genre and has done it compellingly and successfully all the way into now in 2013. We had a rare opportunity to sit down and talk about his legacy, his philosophy, and why he so steadfastly maintained this one particular genre. Thank you so much for your time. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in Canada, went to school at the University of Michigan. At this point, are you already sort of aware? I mean, games on computers was not all that pervasive. You know, the Atari system had been out. We had stuff in arcades. I mean, were you already formulating, you know, your path of really developing sophisticated games for the PC?
Not that particular path, probably, but I've been a gamer since I was, you know, this high. I remember covering the living room floor with toy soldiers and things and whatever. So I've been playing games for a long time. At the university, I got interested in computers. This was mainframes and decks of cards, 80 column cards, and the bad old days, not the good old days, the bad old days. And I actually made a few games in that place. I did like a tic-tac-toe game, you know. But it was shortly after I got out of college that the Atari 800 came out, and that was really what coalesced my interest in gaming and computers. And I saw the opportunity to put those two cool things together and become a game designer. And in those days, to become a game designer, you just kind of sat down in front of your computer and started typing code into the machine, and you know, that was all it took. So my first game was a ripoff of Space Invaders, which I wrote in hand assembled in a 6502 assembly language, on a cassette tape. Those were still the bad old days. We hadn't gotten to the good old days quite yet.
Yeah. But I'm wondering how much of our audience is understanding. They don't know what a cassette tape is, much less you can actually use it with a computer.
Yes, you don't want to know about that. And I went to like the local electronics store with about 10 of these in a baggie, and they bought them, and I was on my way. So that was kind of how I got started as a game designer.
I love how you mentioned that, you know, you would always sort of play with toy soldiers on the floor. And it kind of, you know, I think it's important because when you were starting out, there wasn't an established sort of logic for game design, for how just the game structure was built on. So what were your influences in how you looked at games? Granted, Space Invaders was out, but you were looking at doing something far more sophisticated down the line.
I think so. I mean, I'd played board games, strategy games, things like that. Avalon Hill, SPI, those games. And I think that, you know, you're exactly right. It was Space Invaders was cool, fun, but it really kind of showed the way to the potential of, you know, what games could really be. And that was what was kind of fired my imagination, was taking this technology and doing, you know, more strategy, more sophisticated, deeper games. You know, again, we didn't have a roadmap at that point. We didn't have these genres that we had to stick to, you know. We could just make whatever game we felt like, and, you know, with a game like Pirates, we combined some role-playing and some action and some strategy, and it was, those were the good old days when we could kind of, you know, basically say, let's make a game, and whatever topic hasn't been covered yet. And growing up, I did play all these games, but I also kind of developed an interest in history and things like that. I remember reading, my dad gave me a cool big book about the Civil War, and I remember reading through that and saying, you know, this would make a cool game someday. And I think that's one of the things that people ask me, you know, how do I become a game designer? You know, what courses should I take, et cetera. And there's a lot of technical courses and things like that that are useful, but I really encourage people to have an interest outside of games. You know, games have to be about something. They can't be about other games necessarily. So, you know, I hope people have an interest in history or science or music or whatever it is, that they can bring their own interest to gaming and expand what we do, not just make games about games that have already been made.
Now, if you look at the very early years of Microprose, which I believe started in 1982.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, and prior to Pirates, you're still looking at games that are I guess for lack of a better word, grounded in some semblance of reality, that they're not indulging the sci-fi or the fantasy elements all that heavily. And then, you know, there's that transition into Pirates, which yet again is not the most fantastical representation of piracy
right.
back in the 17th century. I mean, were you always kind of committed to just finding the adventure in real life?
I think so. What our idea was really that you could come to our games with kind of what you already knew about flying or pirates or history or whatever. That there was something cool about those topics that you would kind of already bring in your imagination, because your imagination was a key component in a game that had 4 colors and 320 resolution screen. You had to add a lot in your mind to bring that to life. Now, our approach was to kind of find the fun. What are the cool parts of this topic and bring them to life? I mean, a game like Pirates, we avoided things like scurvy and 6-month-long voyages and kind of the not so much fun part, and tried to it was kind of a combination of the swashbuckling movie approach and enough of the historical accuracy to kind of ground it in the real world. We've heard stories from people that kind of learned their geography of the Caribbean from playing Pirates, so that was accurate to that extent. And there's a kid that kind of his 6th grade geography teacher was amazed that he knew all the ports in the Caribbean because he played Pirates. But in those days, we actually did a lot of our research by getting children's picture books of the topic, because that would really highlight, kind of what's the common currency of this topic. What are the cool things, and that would give us some visual ideas, but also kind of tell us what to highlight in the game. And so we would do our initial research, picking up a few children's books about the topic. And later on, we'd write a 60-page manual about the whatever it was, but that really was the foundation of our games.
Pirates was kind of the big transitional moment. It was the first game that had your name above the title, but more importantly, it really was the first establishment of the turn-based type of gameplay that you're so well known for now. What was it, technology that allowed you to do that? What was that turning point?
You're right. We had been doing essentially military simulation games. We had done Silent Service, we were in a submarine, a couple of airplane games, etc. Those were fun. I enjoyed those. But as a designer, you want to break out a little bit and do something new. And actually, one of our producers had this idea. Why don't we do a Pirates game? It would be cool. And it kind of sparked some ideas in my mind about how we could do things a little differently. We also developed a technology, this is really hardcore, but on the Commodore 64, one of the ways you could bring to do art was by folding it into a font. And we had this cool tool where the artist could actually draw a picture, a beautiful picture, and then you'd press a button and it would fold it into a font, which was a very efficient way to store it. So we had this way of bringing the game to life in a series of kind of pictures and text, almost like a literary-ish, for the time, approach. So we combined that technology with the idea of what if there was an adventure game that wasn't about picking up every object in the room and going north, south, east, and west, but kind of had a movie quality about it, where what are the key plot moments, and you just kind of make a decision of what port do I go to, where do I visit. Anyways, kind of a fast-moving adventure type of game. And then combine that with some action and role-playing and all sorts of other things. We said, yeah, let's do that. We had no we had no fear in those days.
Apparently not. I mean, what you're describing there is kind of what is still considered to be most valuable in games now, which is that sense of player agency and ownership over their own decisions, which, yes, it's feasible now, but it still takes quite a while. Back then, I'm actually having a hard time understanding how you guys, A, could just sort of map out how it's designed, and then B, make it work on the existing technology.
Those were two challenges, but again, we had no fear. We wanted this open world game. I think that's one of the things people really responded to in Pirates, that it had one of the first games that had this open world feel that you could go wherever you wanted. Sail here, sail there, you know, I'm going to be ally with the British for a while. No, I think I'll go with the French or the Dutch or, you know. It had this write your own story quality that turned out to be, I think, one of the things that people really remembered from that game and kind of, you know, is one of their fond memories. We didn't know why we couldn't do that, so we just did it. We were young and fearless, and it worked out. So we were happy.
So from Pirates, I believe the next title, maybe not the exactly next one, but the next major title was Railroad Tycoon.
Yeah.
I think once again, in the modern era of games, I think walking into an office with executives saying, "Hey, we're going to do a railroad simulator," and you're probably not going to get the most positive responses. What was kind of the impetus to do something that, I guess, on some level, philosophically, it was similar to Pirates, but it very much was sort of a heavy simulation of a business practice that had since gone extinct in the United States?
Once again, we were fearless. Railroad Tycoon actually started as a model railroading game. Because model railroads are cool, but they take an incredibly long time to make, and you spend more time working on them than actually running the railroad. So we thought, hey, you know, if we can do it on the computer, you can do it really quickly and have the fun of actually running your railroad and less of the pain of actually building it. So that was kind of the, you know, step one was make a model railroad simulator. And then as well, as long as we got this, why don't we, you know, make some money and have a reason to run your trains, okay. Well, let's make it historical and add, you know, the history of trains and those cool old trains and then modern diesels and make it, you know, the East Coast and then, well, let's add the West and, well, the Europe has some cool trains too, so let's make a European scenario. And actually towards the end we said, well, this would be more exciting if there were other railroads competing against you, so you had some real incentive to do really well. So we added that, kind of. It was pretty shaky, but it was, as many of our games, they grow incrementally. You know, you kind of say, well, let's start with what are those core fun things and get them in there. But then, oh, you know, we got to add this and we need some of this. And you also identify what the holes are in your game. You know, it's not so much fun over here, but it would be more fun, you know, if we added competition. It would really give you an incentive to make my railroad run as efficiently as possible. Or, you know, I get kind of bored, so I'm going to need later engines and more. I need the sense of progress, you know. So you kind of identify what the problems are in the game and find the solutions from those history books or whatever, you know, that kind of makes the game a full experience, and that happened with Railroad Tycoon.
Which I think was a far more effective and far more enjoyable way of learning about the role of the railroads in American history than reading that book, The Octopus, which is really, really kind of tiring and old.
Well, I think, you know, you've hit on really the key to most of our games and many games is that they give you the opportunity to tell your own story as opposed to, you know, reading somebody else's story. And in that process, you're actually learning something. And you know, we're often asked about our games. You know, are they educational? You know, are they shouldn't they be used in a school curriculum? Yes, they should. But we're not setting out to be educational. But people enjoy learning, and that kind of joy is learning is hidden in there.
Well, it's because of the systems. I think once you sort of see how it all works together, there's a sense of discovery and invention that goes along with it.
Yeah, and you can sense that, oh, I'm better at this than I was last week or 2 weeks ago. You know, you get that feeling of progress and understanding things better and wanting to try, you know, to get even better or try a different strategy or something like that, and that keeps you coming back to play over and over again.
So Pirates, the railroad industry. And then it's like, let's just do Civilization. I mean, I'm assuming you're about to tell me you were rather fearless in this regard as well. But I mean, that is still, I mean, I don't know, I almost want to say, was it hubris to take on something so massive?
Yes, I guess it was. We did actually say almost exactly what you know, we did railroads. What's bigger than railroads? You know, we liked the kind of God game paradigm where you start very small and build something of your own design. We liked the interaction of systems like the operation, the finances, the competition. We liked the way those all kind of work together. So what's a topic that's bigger than railroads, but can kind of have this quality of starting small and growing over time, having a number of different aspects and considerations that interact with each other in an interesting way. And we said civilization. It just felt like the next step, taking that kind of empire building concept of railroads and cranking it up a little bit.
And I mean, it was quite diverse in terms of, it had that core that was in Pirates, that was in Railroad Tycoon of, you have a lot of player agency in how you build your civilization. It was based on sort of the logic of how civilizations were, established. Was when you started out, did you foresee it being as ambitious as it would end up being?
It was actually more ambitious. We actually had to do more paring down and than we did adding in that game. The topic is so rich that the problem we had was what not to put in the game, really. And we kind of came upon this idea of the tech tree fairly early, and that became kind of the core of the game. That really controlled the rate and the extent to which it got more complicated and more interesting. It gave us a tool, kind of a rational tool to start with a fairly small set of options and choices, and then make that grow over time at a rate that the player kind of controlled. I think they said, "Oh, I want to research, ironworking next, and that's going to allow me to build some of these things." So we weren't imposing complexity on the player. We were allowing them to generate their own complexity and their own growth through the game. In my mind, frankly, Civilization is a pretty simple game. The individual systems themselves are very straightforward. You have a bucket, and if you fill it with food, your population grows. You have another bucket if you fill it with hammers, then a spearman appears or whatever. Those are very very simple things. My guy can move 2 squares per turn. The fundamentals of that game are very straightforward and comprehensible. But you bring to the game your idea of Napoleon, or your ideas about Gandhi, and how how Gandhi should react, and why is Gandhi threatening me with nuclear weapons? So you're adding to the game a lot of your own imagination, and that's what I think it helps it to feel huge and fun.
It's large as Civilization.
Right, exactly.
How many people worked on that game?
I'd say about 8 to 10, directly. I believe I did almost all the programming on that game. We might have had some graphics tools. I apologize to anybody that I'm slighting here. But
I think it would be much smaller than teams who make games these days.
Yes. I wrote the AI and the gameplay code. We had 4 or 5 artists doing different parts. Actually, a lot of the map graphics that ended up in the final game, especially on the 4-color version, are the graphics that I created really initially for the prototype. So yeah, it was a very, very, very different team structure in those days than some of our games are today. We'll probably talk about that, but we're kind of getting back in some ways to that model again. But yeah, it was a small team, probably under a year of development time.
Wow.
And those were the good old days.
So, probably not just then, but not long afterwards, we start to see sort of the new transitions of what's happening in video games. We're getting into the era of Doom, in Quake, and the action game, graphics. Suddenly there's graphics accelerators, but you decided to sort of stick with what you did. I'd like to think that that turn-based strategy was also. It was predicated on the fact that you really couldn't do something that was real time with the technology that was at hand. But even when the technology had shifted, you really wanted to sort of stick with what you did so well, and it worked out for you. But I'm curious if you had started to flirt with the ideas of, hey, maybe we need to kind of keep pace with the Joneses.
That was something that we certainly talked about, but it was really our feeling that turn-based was not just because we couldn't do real time. It was a genre that made sense, regardless, because of the kind of player control over the pace of decision making. That allowed a lot of people to play who might not be comfortable in a real-time game. And it also allowed us to present deeper decisions. If you have enough time, as much time as you want to make decisions, they can be more complicated and kind of involve different things. We loved the Age of Empires series. Those were very fun games, and those were kind of, in a way, Civilization made real time. And you get some things for that, and you have to give up some things for that. So we were able to cover this whole span of history and this epic story at maybe a lower level of intensity. Whereas Age of Empires is a lot of fun. It's a very intense game. Things are moving quickly. So those are really two different games. They're just two different approaches that are driven in large part, I think, by the turn-based versus real-time core that they have. And so, we felt that turn-based was just a genre that lent itself to the kind of game that we wanted to present with Civilization, and so we've stuck with it through the years.
Which is, and thank you for that. But as time has gone on, I mean, it's done well. They resonate. I mean, what in your mind is, we talked a bit about the player agency, but what is that core gameplay element that you've never sort of, taken out in various iterations of Civilization or Pirates or other games out there that just seems to hit the sweet spot with so many players out there?
I think it's the player owns the story that they write in those games. One of our philosophies is the player is the star of your game, of the game. And I think every Civ player has a moment or two that they remember of when this happened or when that happened, because they were so invested in the story that they were creating by playing the game. And also knowing that each story is different. I think you know when you play Civ that this story is only going to be told once, and it's only being told to you, and it's a unique story that you own. And that's why people tell other people what happened, because they know that something else happened in your game that happened in my game, and you're not going to have seen this cool thing that happened in my game. So it's something worth telling other people about, because you can appreciate it, but you didn't experience it, or it's kind of a surprise to you. So I think people feel this ownership in these stories that they feel are unique to them. That brings them back to play again, because it's like, well, what's this next story going to be like? Because they know the world is different. Enough is going to be different that it's a brand new story that's going to be told. And I think in all of our games we try to have this idea that you're controlling the direction and path of the game. It's unique to you. If you win, you can take total ownership over that win. If you
win the world,
right, and that's satisfying, I think, and that's the core to Civilization. And I think all the games that we make, that we want the player to feel that the game is empowering them to do these cool things, as opposed to just trying to figure out how the game works or what does it want me to do and follow that path.
So the Sid Meier, who is making a tic-tac-toe game with computer cards, I mean, could you even conceive of where you would be personally, where the industry would be, and where sort of your nascent ideas would actually find themselves in the hands of millions and millions of people? I mean, if it didn't occur to you then, when did you think, hey, I might be onto something here?
Definitely had no idea at that point. There were a couple of watersheds, I think, going through the career. There was a point at which I could quit my day job. For quite a while, I had a real job, and then at night I was making these games, and that's part of the whole MicroPro story, where Bill Staley and I got together. And at some point he said, "Sid, I think we're making enough money that you can quit your day job and do this full time." And that was 3 or 4 games into the whole history of MicroPros. I think there was a moment with Civilization where it kind of broke through. It actually took a couple months for that game to develop some traction. But at that point, we were getting this kind of great feedback from our players through the mail in in those days. So that took a while, and kind of was a validation of our approach to games and how we were making games. So there were a few points at which new opportunities arose in it. It felt at one point it felt like I could maybe do this for the rest of my life. This could be a real career, not just a hobby. But it definitely in the early days it was we had no idea what the possibilities were. It was just fun for the moment, and that really continues to drive us. Is are we having fun making this game? And that's the best sign to us that it's going to be a fun game for our players. So it's still part of our philosophy is to have fun when we make games.
All right, well, I'm just so glad that you were fearless because I'm having a lot of fun right now as a result of it. Sid, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.